All right, it is 3 p.m. South African time, 9 a.m. New York time, USA. Thanks for joining, everybody. There will probably be a few others joining us, but we'll get going. So this is part 2 of best practices with Pluto LMS integration. Today is the 25th of August, so thanks everybody for joining. My name is Ian Fourie, founder of Pluto LMS. Thanks so much for joining us today. So just in terms of the agenda for today's webinar, we'll talk about what integrations Pluto LMS offers. And in particular, we'll do a bit of a deeper dive into external repositories, LTI, xAPI, the API, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So this is part 2. In part 1, we covered video conferencing, so tools like Zoom, Google Meet, etc. We covered payment integrations, we did single sign-on, and we covered Zapier in quite a bit of detail. That webinar is on YouTube if you would like to watch the recording. So this is just a continuation of that webinar in part 2. So in this one, we will talk about external repositories, LTI, xAPI, and API. Great, so diving into repositories. So we have external native repositories and integrations through Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, Dropbox, Box, and AWS S3. So what is an external repository? It effectively allows you to connect to a third-party storage provider and add files to your LMS. So instead of having to go into, let's say, Google Drive, where you download the PDF file or the video file, and then you have that on your desktop, and then you need to re-upload it to the LMS. You skip that whole process by just having a direct link to your external repository, such as Google Drive, where when you're adding a file to the LMS system, you can simply click on OneDrive or Google Drive or the providers that I mentioned, and then you can add the file straight from your cloud hosting provider. So this just gives you quick access. It's quite beneficial in that regard. And then you don't need to have files stored on your local computer. So if you're out of office or you're working remotely, you can easily access those files on the go, and you don't need to store anything on your laptop. Best case scenario, if your laptop gets stolen or your laptop breaks, the files are stored in the cloud, so they're never lost. So what does this look like in Pluto LMS? So I'm going to give you the Google Drive showcase over here. So the way to connect Google Drive to Pluto LMS is you hit Site Admin, you're going to click on Integrations, and then first what you have to do is connect the single sign-on. So you're going to authenticate with Google Drive in order to connect to their system. So you're going to hit single sign-on, and then depending on your service provider, you're going to click on Google. And we've got quite an extensive support doc on this in terms of how you set up the Pluto LMS app within Google in order to connect with that. So what you're doing is getting the client ID and client secret from Google Drive, and that will then get inserted into your LMS as shown over here. So you're going to authenticate with Google Workplace, pull that ID and secret, plug that into Pluto LMS. And then what this will give you the ability to do is when you're inside a course and you would like to add a file, whether it's a PDF, etc. For example, we're going to add a Google file over here. When you add your activity and it prompts you to upload a file, you click on that. And then what it's going to do is then give you the option of selecting one of those providers that I mentioned. So Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, Dropbox, Amazon S3, and Box. When you click on that, you're going to log into your account, and if you authenticated your single sign-on correctly, you will then be able to connect to your Google Drive immediately and then embed and add your files as shown over here. So this was just an example for Google Drive. It's a very similar process for the other third-party providers that I mentioned, but we do have quite extensive support docs on that. But this is what it gives you the ability to do. So it's quite useful in that regard. As mentioned, these are the providers discussed. Great. So Next, we're going to talk about LTI. So, LTI, what does that even mean? So what it stands for is Learning Tools Interoperability. So effectively, in layman's term, what that's going to allow you to do is connect to a variety of external tools, content, and activities into your LMS. So you can connect to third-party services, you can pull courses in from other sites, you can even pull courses in from other LMS sites that are LTI compliant. That just allows you to work seamlessly between two systems. And obviously that comes with its own benefits. So it's easy to add existing material from external sources. You don't have to build that material yourself. You can just embed it as an LTI and connect it that way. And this is going to allow you to sync between two systems to keep everything up to date for you. So the way to get connected with LTI, this is at a site-wide level. So what you want to do is click Site Admin. You're going to click on Integrations, and then you're going to click on LTI. And then depending on your third-party service, they will provide documentation on how to connect to their LTI connection. So once you follow their support guides, this is where you'll come to configure those tools. So there's a number of ways you can configure them. You can do them manually, simply add them through a URL, and then once you start populating these tools over here, the list will grow and you can manage it from here. So what does this look like within a course? The nice thing is, you simply hit Edit Course Material. That's going to get you into editing mode. And then we've got an activity called External Tool over there. And then once you add that, the end result will look something like this. So this is an example. Some of our clients use the native Zoom integration, but some clients also use Zoom LTI. The benefit of using Zoom LTI is the fact that you can have your Zoom meetings, you can see upcoming meetings, previous meetings, personal meeting rooms, but the major advantage with the LTI integration with Zoom is the fact that your students can actually end up downloading the Zoom recordings. So they can go in and download past meetings or webinars or any conferences that you did have. They can download that from here. Another use case is embedding content from other sites. So if there's existing content that is LTI compatible, you can pull that in, embed it into your LMS, so it's all under your brand, and you can pull that content in so that there's a seamless connection between the two systems, and your students can then interact with the content. What is a popular use case with some of our clients is they sometimes connect to external LMS systems. For example, in retail, perhaps some of the internal staff members need to learn a new payment system, for example, and the payment system provider actually has their own LMS. What's quite useful is if that LMS is LTI compatible, they can share courses between the two platforms. And that way the students and records can stay in the inside of Pluto LMS, inside of your LMS instance, and you can keep track of their engagement with the activities, even though the course material sits on a third-party LMS. So that's quite a popular use case and quite advantageous when it comes to syncing information. Great. So next, we're just going to discuss xAPI, or another term for xAPI is TinCan. They're used interchangeably. So first of all, what is xAPI or what is TinCan? X, just in other words, it's experience API. So it just makes it possible to extract data from your LMS usage. What do I mean by usage? More along the lines of how your students engaging in the platform, how long are they spending in the platform. So Pluto has reports, and inside of those reports you can view logs. The Experience API, or the xAPI, just allows you to extract those logs in a more seamless way, and so that you can read that data in some third-party LRS, and we'll get to that in a second. The benefits is really just to collect live data, And the ability to collect live data gives you the ability to improve your user experience. So if you're using an LRS tool, you can track your, the data within your LMS, and that way you can measure outcomes, gain some analytics in the form of business intelligence, and improve your end user experience, improve your client experience, improve your internal staff experience, that using data. So that's the big advantage with xAPI. So for some of the more technical people, how does this work? Just quite simply, Pluto LMS takes the log, expands it, translates it, and then creates another entry for the LRS tool to extract. So what will happen is the LRS will capture this information and then use that outside of the LMS environment so that you can get the reports that you want. So how do you set this up? You're going to click on Site Admin, head over to Integrations, and then click on Log Store Setup. So depending on the LRS provider that you're using, you're going to put the endpoint in there, and then you're going to authenticate with a username and password. You can define the batch sizes that are actually sent to the LRS. And what's quite nice is you can include or exclude guest actions. So what is a guest action? In other words, anyone who may be visiting your LMS site that is not logged in. So sometimes you want to exclude that information because perhaps, you have 1,000, 2,000 visitors come there, they're not logging in, and that could actually distort your data a bit. So you might want to actually exclude that information so that it's not read in the report, and you only want to actually read the logs of users that are logged into your system. So that's the benefit of not ticking that box over there. So once you're pulling it into your LRS system, an example would be student session time. You could pull various reports, study different data, and you can start to see things. Is there any correlation between how much time a user is spending on the system versus how many courses they're completing? There are hundreds of different reports that you could pull, but this is just an example of one. Some of the third-party LRS tools out there. There are a few, to name a few. You've got Rastiki software and Yet Analytics. They are third-party services. They come with their own rates. But if you are looking to build one yourself, there's a useful link over here that you can actually look at if you would like to build it yourself. However, it can be quite complex, just as a word of warning. Great. So we've spoken about the xAPI, which shouldn't be confused with API. So now we're going to talk about APIs. So what is an API? So an API is an application programming interface. So quite simply put, it allows two applications to talk to each other. What is the benefit? Well, you can create any custom integration you like, so long as the tools have API documentation and access. You'll be able to connect the two systems and, of course, sync information across multiple applications. So this becomes quite useful if you are technical and you wish to connect two systems, and there might not be an out-the-box integration. For example, we have an out-the-box Zoom integration. We have an out-the-box Google Drive integration, but there are going to be times where a third-party system doesn't have an out-the-box solution. That's where APIs come in. So you can create any custom integration you like, so long as the two systems have this ability. So just to give you a bit of a visual overview of an API. So on the left, we've got Pluto LMS. So effectively, you've got push APIs and you've got get APIs. Push APIs are APIs that send information to your middleman over here, and then your get APIs are where you pull information. The same would be for the third party. So the API is effectively the middleman between the two systems. So Pluto LMS will have its own API, and we'll go through that in a bit. And then the third party will also have an API, And the middleman is where you will connect the two with these push and get actions. So what are your push API functions? So this is just at present. So today's the 25th of August, 2021. We are constantly adding API functions, and we'd love feedback from clients, and we'll also add as we go. But as of today, these are the push functions that we do have. So I'll give a few examples for some of the popular ones, but some push functions include creating a user, updating a user, enrolling a user. So in other words, what this will do is from your API, it will push data to the LMS in order to create these functions. So when you create a user, update a user, enroll a user, the API will send information to Pluto LMS. You can create branches, you can delete branches, you can add a user to a branch, you can remove a user from a branch, create the group, delete a group, add user to group, remove user from group, override activity completion status, as well as create calendar events or delete calendar events. So to give some examples, perhaps you have a CRM, you might want to create a user. So whenever a new user is created in the CRM, you might want to create that user inside of Pluto LMS. You can do so. You might want to update that user from the CRM to the LMS. That's another use case example. Or, we do have two-way sync integrations for calendar events, but perhaps there is some external system you would like to plug into. You can create calendar events from these third-party tools. Some of the get functions, so this is going to pull information from Pluto LMS. So effectively what's going to happen here is you can get users from the system. You can also find a list of enrolled users in the system. So you might want to find how many users are enrolled into a particular course. You want to pull that list out, and you also want to understand who those users are. So you can get that from the system. You can get messages from the system. If you want to see messages across your system, you can pull that. Of course, you can get course grades, assignment grades, quiz grades, so some of your assessments in the platform. And quite importantly, you can also track status. So you can monitor whether certain activities have been completed or not, if they're in progress, if they're complete, or if they've not started, as well as your overall course completion status. So you can see whether or not the student has completed their course or not. You can pull that information. So we use the term get, but this can also be interchangeable with search. So, while you're pulling information, you can also use these same API functions to actually search that information. You might want to search for a user or find a grade within your platform. You will be able to do that. So what we're going to do is just a sample API. So this will require a developer's input, a professional developer's input, but we're just going to go through a basic example just to explain the concept of the API and how you can actually set that up. So what are we going to do today? We're going to create a new user inside of the LMS. So we're going to use an example. Let's say you have a new Salesforce contact and you want to send that information to Pluto LMS. So your API is going to be the middleman between Pluto LMS and Salesforce. And the function that you're going to use is core_user_create_users. So our support documentation is quite detailed with the various functions. And then you're going to have these parameters. You're going to need to tell the system what username that user needs to have. The authentication type, in this case, we're going to use manual. They're going to manually be created. That you're going to have to pull a password and enter it into the system. You can give that user a first name, a last name, and of course an email address for authentication purposes. So this is the information you need from Salesforce. So basic example, what you're going to have, and this is going to just be a normal post, and you can use a browser to test this, and I'll show you what that looks like. But in red here, you're going to have your LMS domain. So we offer custom white labeling, so whatever your LMS domain is, that will be in red. you're going to have this strip of code over here in your URL. Your WS token, in other words, your web service token, you're going to input that as well. And in this example, we're just going to create this user manually. So we're going to use that function. We're going to use that 0, give that user a username, manual authentication, a random password, John Doe, and then their email address. So the way that you get your token needed for that URL that I showed you, so the token is that bit over here. So the way you get your token is you go into your LMS, you click on Site Admin, Integrations, Manage Tokens, and then what you're going to do is you're going to add a token. You're going to select the user you wish to assign that token to. Typically, this is going to be your developer or yourself if you are the developer. And you're going to select API and then save. So what that's going to do is generate a token for you. It's typically a long form digit like that with multiple numbers and letters. So you're going to copy that and then use this in your URL. So you're going to enter that token in over here. So this might not look pretty. Typically, APIs are not pretty. Developers typically understand this a lot better. So this is all of those parameters pulled into one URL. So everything we've just discussed, we're just pulling all that information together, and we're using this little and symbol over here to separate the parameters, because we're going to paste this into our browser URL. So if you want to test this, if you haven't set up some API middleman yet, you just want to test it through a browser, I'd recommend going into incognito. If you're using Google Chrome or any other browser you're using, you can simply post this into the URL portion as you see over here. So once you post that long string, the browser is going to actually send information to the LMS. And obviously this will be more secure when you're setting up an API. You'll have your own security. That's where the professional developer really comes in useful. So once you send this information to the LMS, it's going to return a response. So in this case, as you can see, the response is ID and username. So we can see that the LMS has successfully created this user. It's assigned an ID to that user, and based on the username you gave it, it's showing which username is associated with this ID. So why is this response useful? Because once you've created the user, that might not be the last step in your integration. You may need this information for another step. You may need to send this user an email, or you may need to extract the ID of this user to enroll them into a course, for example. So that's why the system will give you a response in order to retrieve that information to use it somewhere else. And if what I spoke about for the last few minutes or so didn't make any sense at all, and you're not a developer, what we really recommend is using xAPI as an alternative to an API. So you'll find the recording on YouTube in part 1. So we did best practices with Pluto LMS integrations part 1, and there's a section on xAPI. You can find that section on YouTube, and we go through this in detail. But ultimately what xAPI is, it's a replacement for the API. So it's just an easy to use program to connect over 3,000 plus different applications. So you can create workflows, and you don't need a developer to connect these 3,000 plus applications. There's Google Sheets, Outlook, there's Salesforce, HubSpot. There's so many various applications you can use. MailChimp's very popular, Zendesk. This just allows you to seamlessly connect the systems without the need for a developer, which means that it will be code-free and you can just plug and play. So we have a section on our previous webinar explaining that. So if you look at the API that we discussed earlier, you would need a developer to do this. But what xAPI will do, just in a visual way, is replace that middleman, and it just gives you a user interface to connect these two systems. Great. So kept the webinar fairly brief and short, because I know there may be quite a few questions that come up from this. We may break these sections down in the future and do a deeper dive should the demand arise. But for now, we'd love to engage with those that are on the webinar. So if you do have questions, please post them into the chat, and then what I'll do is try my best to answer all of them. So the first question is there a way to have student access Zoom recordings on Pluto LMS? Yes, absolutely. So I'm just going to go back a couple of slides in case that was missed. So we do provide a native Zoom integration. So the native Zoom integration is not as extensive as the LTI integration. Don't confuse the two. The support docs will clearly define that for you. But with the native Zoom integration, you get the ability to easily set up a Zoom meeting and launch that within your course. What's really nice with the LTI integration is the fact that every time you have your Zoom meeting, and if you record it, you'll actually be able to have these files visible for your end user so that they can actually click on them, download them, or view them online. We have another question. What support do you offer on the API? So that's a really great question. As you can imagine, when there's multiple parties involved, that can be quite tricky. So what we do is we provide full support, free support on any plan that has API access. So we help you with how to connect the Pluto LMS API to your middleman. That's the support that we provide. So if I just go back a slide, this will give you a better representation. So we have support docs on our push and get functions in order to connect to the system. Unfortunately, we're not a development service, so we won't be building the API for you. That's not part of our service offering, but we do provide full support on how to connect to the API. So if you have questions on, for example, if you're struggling to create a user and your API is not working, or you need assistance with creating a user and you have a question on that, we're more than happy to assist. Questions related to third-party support docs. So for example, if you're struggling to understand the Salesforce API documentation, the question will be better suited for Salesforce because they will be able to assist you better with their own API. What tools can we use? So we've got another question over here. What tools can we use to build API integration? So that's a great question. You could use Postman. Google offers a tool. AWS offers a tool as well. Even Zapier can be used to build API. They also have webhooks and certain functionality within there. Some of the most popular ones are Postman. That's the place where you can start. There are quite a few out there, whatever best suits your needs and budget. Great. Another question. What if the third party does not have API functionality? Great question. So again, going back to this sort of visualization, you can look at, the third party as the API, but if they don't have it, then that obviously becomes an issue. So the way that programs speak to one another, generally in modern day software, the API is used. My best recommendation to make is contact that service provider, ask them what alternatives they may have, and how they can assist you. But typically, the industry standard in software, at least the leading platforms, will have access to API. Great. So got another question here. Can you provide a sandpit for testing API integrations to protect live records? Great question. We do provide that on our latest enterprise plan. So some institutions may require a dedicated LMS sandpit. And if you do need access to a sandpit, let us know, drop us an email, and we can sort out something for you so that you can protect your live data. Great. Got a question here. Can I add courses from LinkedIn Learning or other third-party systems? Great questions. Second link, really useful. So LinkedIn Learning has an LTI implementation, which is fairly up to date. It was updated short of a month ago. So it'll actually give you documentation on how to connect to the LTI. Really useful if you want to connect the two systems so that you can actually track user engagement between the two systems. Really, it's going to give you LTI reporting. LTI in your learning management system, it goes through quite a bit of detail. It gives you those endpoints that you need, the authentication, etc. So, yeah, really useful tool. And any third-party system which does have LTI will have the endpoints and authentication needed in order to connect to Pluto LMS. So if you just drop an email to their support team, I'm sure they'll be able to assist you with their documentation on that. Good. Looks like that's all the questions. For those that were here, thank you so much for attending. This recording will be posted on YouTube for those that perhaps missed it when I'm unable to attend. For those that were here and asked the questions, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Be sure to join us next week, Wednesday, same time. We are going through a series of webinars. If you go to our website, plutolms.com/webinars, you'll be able to actually find registration links to the upcoming webinars in September. So there's quite a few exciting ones coming up, and we look forward to seeing you there.